The following program is brought to you by Podcast One Sportsnet.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers.
Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figure it out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Requires new line. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 480p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.
Direct from the heart of Lakers Nation, Podcast One Sportsnet brings you America's Lakers Podcast, the official podcast of the Los Angeles Lakers. Get the inside scoop without the gossip about your favorite team that lives up to the purple and gold standard.
Welcome to another edition of America's Lakers Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Larsuel, at Aaron Larsuel, Larsuel on Twitter. Thank you for listening. And before we get to our next guest, it's Bobby Marks, at Bobby Marks42 on Twitter. He used to work on the Nets front office, and I asked him quite a bit about the Lakers offseason, about the draft, what that process is like, and also some of the free agency questions. But before we do that, a couple housekeeping items. Please, please, please rate and review and subscribe to the podcast. If you look at iTunes, if you type in America's Lakers Podcast on iTunes, you can hit the little subscribe button and give us 5 stars. That will do us a lot of good. And if you want to review it and write some kind words, I'd appreciate it. But one other thing I want to ask of you, and you'll hear about this later in the podcast. This podcast is obviously free to download, and I'm hoping you can help me keep it that way. So I want you to do a little survey. You'll hear more about this, but before we get into the conversation, it is www.podcastone.com/mysurvey or podcastone.com and click the survey banner. It's really easy to do. It won't take more than a few minutes, and it would be very helpful. So you can find this podcast at iTunes. Obviously, please, as I said, rate and review. You can find it on iTunes. You can also find it on Lakers.com in the multimedia tab, the Podcast One app, podcastone.com. So many places to find it. And you're going to hear some great things from Bobby in this conversation. He talks about what an advantage it is to have Jeanie as the ownership group, the continuity that the ownership group has displayed, having Magic in the room for all of these free agency pitch meetings, and Rob Pelinka, what a great advantage that is, in addition to all the wonderful things that outside of basketball that the city of Los Angeles brings. And you'll hear how fond of the young core Bobby Marks is. So thanks to Bobby for jumping on with me. And you'll also hear during this conversation, next week I'm going to do the show. There may be one before that. I'm working on a couple things, got a couple guests in mind. So there may be 2 podcasts next week, one with a guest before the draft, and then on draft day, I'm going to do America's Lakers Podcast. I'm going to do the show from the facility. So hopefully we'll be talking to Rob and Magic and all the decision makers on draft day next Thursday. America's Lakers Podcast will be at the facility in El Segundo. Looking forward to that. But in the meantime, enjoy the conversation with Bobby Marks. And I think it runs about 30 minutes. So enjoy the conversation with Bobby, and I will talk to you soon. I will talk to you next week. Thank you for your time, Bobby. How are you?
I'm good, Aaron. How are you?
I'm very well. So as I mentioned, this is the time of year where guys in your profession, it's really where you make your money, where you earn your money. So I want to ask you what it's like as a front office person, as an exec, what it's like this time of year for the draft workouts and the draft process. What is that like?
Yeah, I would say this time of year, along with the trade deadline in February, if from a building a roster standpoint, is probably the best time of year. And it's ironic that we get to the draft next Thursday, and then you've got free agency 10 days later. But all the teams, including teams that don't even have a draft pick, the last 2 months have been spent bringing in players for workouts, conducting medical background, investigative background, psychological, You're more in that fact gathering along with, your scouts, going out and seeing these players for the last, 2, 3, 4 years. And now you're trying to kind of put all that information together. And then what will eventually happen is that you'll come up with a top 60 list on your board. And for most teams, that's how you kind of draft. And then the one thing I would say is to, and have your options ready come the night of the draft in case you have the opportunity to move up or maybe move out of the first round. So there will be certainly trade scenarios that pop open. But yeah, this is as good as a time for a fan and for people in front office. It's like trying to put a big jigsaw puzzle together, and sometimes the pieces fit and sometimes they don't.
Speaking of the draft, you're going to be doing some draft coverage on ESPN. I will be at the Lakers facility. We're going to do the show from there. But there's been rumors, speaking of the Lakers draft, there's been a lot of rumors floating around about 2 promises that have been made to 2 different guys. And kind of just recently a rumor that the Lakers were considering moving up to the mid-first round from later in the first round. As far as those draft promises go, all the digging I've done has said that no promises have been made. But how much this time of year, how much stuff that fans hear, Lakers fans even in this case specifically, but fans in general, NBA fans in general, how much stuff that we hear, the rumors that we hear coming out of teams, how much of that is true? How much of that is just kind of smokescreen? What should people believe?
I think that a lot of that comes out as smokescreen. I do. I mean, there are players that could be guaranteed, and I was never a big proponent of guaranteeing a player in the draft, unless it's maybe in the second round here, because what happens if a player slides to you that was projected maybe in the top 14 and for some reason fell to you at 20, 21? Now you've got to stick to that promise as far as the player that you guaranteed. I mean, we guaranteed a player in Zoran Planic back in I think 2002. And I still believe there was better players on the board, but because we made that guarantee, you have to stick through it here. But yeah, you're going to see in the next week here a lot of information coming out about a lot of different players here. We might see more information about Michael Porter Jr., who from Missouri, who with the back here, as far as some teams might be saying he's sliding, or some teams might hinting that he might jump into the top 5 here. So there's a lot of unknown. It's just a matter of kind of figuring out what's true and what's not true.
So you just mentioned the promises that are made all throughout the league. And interesting question for me when you bring that up is you said back in 2002 there were guys you liked better, but you had to keep your promise. I'm sure there are teams that come into this situation and don't keep their promise, but why do you keep your promise if there's guys you like better? Is it because you want to maintain that relationship primarily with agents, I would guess. Is that right?
That's the big thing. I think the relationships you build with agents, I think, even though it might hurt you right now, or if you keep to your word and maybe you miss out on an opportunity, I think there'll be a free agent down the road that that agent has, and that would help you as far as landing that player here. I think I don't remember a time seeing a team back out of a promise. Certainly there's things in free agency where maybe a deal falls through, but I can't recall a time when a guy gets promised. And then the other thing, Aaron, is hard too, is that if you are a team, let's say picking, if you're San Antonio is picking 18. And, another team promised a player and you're interested, it's hard to kind of get a good understanding as far as, to draft that player, because, the likelihood is that you're not going to get them in for a visit. You're not going to get the medical information. You're not going to be able to meet with the player. So you really got to go into it blind a little bit. We had that situation in New Jersey with Reggie Jackson, who got picked by Oklahoma City. And he was picked before us, but we tried getting Reggie in and we couldn't get the medical information. And I think what happens is that you usually pass on players like that, because if you don't have the physical, it makes it hard for an organization to draft somebody.
Reggie's been hurt quite a bit since, so perhaps that was the right one. So we just, talked about the rumors of the Lakers both making promises and also wanting to move up. So conceptually for the Lakers or any other team, the Lakers picked 25th. But if you wanted to go in this draft specifically, if you wanted to go from later in the first round, say 25th, up to somewhere late lottery or the middle of the first round, what's the cost in doing something like that?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to cost you one of your, it could cost you a possibility, a Josh Hart, or it could cost you something in the future here. I think you have to kind of, dig your heels in the sand and kind of figure out what that premium is going to be. I don't see a scenario where you can get into the top 7 unless you're really giving up away a lot of your young players here. Now, is there a scenario where maybe you can get to 14 or 15? It would cost you your current first round pick, and then it would probably also cost you a player. And and I don't know if you're in the game to start risking. How that's gone when you're trading trading future draft picks. And I think that we've seen. And you've seen it too with the value of draft picks when you can get Kyle Kuzma, you get Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, and Josh Hart. You start building a core, and then you kind of can come into free agency and try to sell that core. So I think jumping from where they are right now, in the mid-20s to get into the mid-teens, I think it's going to cost you. It's not going to cost you multiple second rounds to attach. I think it's going to probably cost you one of your young players or something in the future.
Well, we're going to talk about that. Why the Lakers may not want to do that. What the assets may be used for in a little bit. You're listening to Bobby Marks at Bobby Marks 42 on the Twitter machine, and he is a front office insider for ESPN and worked in the Nets front office as the assistant GM for a while. So you just mentioned a lot of the young core that the Lakers have. What do you think about this roster? How do you view this roster? And if you're Magic, Rob Pelinka on draft night, if you're in their shoes, what are you looking for? Not necessarily a player specifically, but what kind of guy? What are you looking for to build to this team, add to this team?
I think whenever I look at rosters and how they're built, I kind of really want to use the housing market as an example. And, how you build it as far as, Brandon Ingram may be the first floor, and then, Kuzma, Ball, Hart are kind of the walls. Now you got to go figure out how you get a roof put on and everything else that comes in there. And I think there's certainly a foundation in place based on I think they have the ability to draft. I thought last year's draft was a home run, probably one of the best in Lakers history to be able to get those 3 players. Now you have, Brandon, and now you go into a summer, and you'll have another pick here if you wind up keeping it. Now you go into a summer where you have something to sell. I mean, it's hard to sell to free agents something that they do not want, no matter how much money you have. And yes, there is an appeal to Los Angeles, to everything that comes out off the court, the non-basketball. But we've learned, and you learned in this day and age that, sometimes that's just not good enough anymore. That you need an all NBA type player needs to have that, to know that how this team is going to get better. What is the flexibility going forward? What is the young players around me, and what other players that we can add? And I think if you're the Lakers, you hit on some of that, but you certainly have got some unfinished business here.
So last draft question, and then we'll move on to some other issues with the Lakers this coming off season this summer. Take us inside. Obviously, you've been in a bunch of them, but what is the war room like on draft day? You say this draft day you're going to be doing the coverage with ESPN. I'll be over at the facility adjacent to, in the room next to the Lakers war room, and I'll be talking to a bunch of the guys as they come out after their picks. But what is that war room like? Take us inside the walls. You mentioned the walls of the house. Take us inside the walls of the war room. What's that like on draft night?
It's like working on a Wall Street floor. It's like you're working on at Wall Street as far as the action that goes on. There's a build up to Thursday night. In New Jersey and Brooklyn, we would be wrapping up our individual workouts probably right around now. Maybe we would have a couple over the weekend, and then what you do is you kind of bring your scouts into the room on over the weekend on Sunday, and that's when you start putting your board together. And you put your list together. I always said you draft on best available, and there are certain times when you get into that debate, and then by Tuesday or Wednesday you start massaging the board a little bit. You look at the medical, you look at the background, you look at the psych, you bring your general manager in, and then you start moving pieces. What guys get red flag? You have options as far as if you can move up, move back, going into Thursday night. What we did in Brooklyn and New Jersey too is we started putting dollar signs next to the picks in the 30s in the second round. based on, all right, what are we willing to pay if we have a chance to go up to pick 40, let's say? Would we pay $2 million, $2.5
You mean
million?
as far as buying a second-round pick? Yeah,
buying a second-round pick. So a lot of that is, so now you have all your prep work. So when you get into Thursday night, you have an idea. If we are picking 7, okay, here are the players. This is what, when it gets to you at that pick, this is who is going to be left. And I think where teams get in trouble is that all of a sudden you get in a disagreement where the guy who's ranked 10th all of a sudden leapfrogs past the guy who's 7th. And I think that's kind of where you do get in trouble here. But yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot of action going on. I think sometimes it's based on how many picks you have, in the first round, or maybe if you don't have any picks at all. And then you also have the player element to it. We saw last year the Chicago-Minnesota trade. That now you're involving actual players, moving around, and you better have all your information. And I say that from a trade standpoint, your medical, your insurance, that if you're able to do a deal that you can get the league on a conference call and you can go right through with it. But yeah, it's a lot of action. And nowadays, Aaron, what you're seeing is that, back in the day, we had our draft list and then we had our camp list. And now how the G League has evolved, now you have your first round, your second round list. You've got your summer league guys. Now you've got your G League guys, your two-way guys. I mean, guys, the list has certainly expanded.
It's a really interesting point because I've been at the Lakers draft workouts here for the last couple weeks, and there's been some questions. These guys aren't in the top 100. Why are you bringing all these guys in? People specifically, and Magic has told me very specifically, we are bringing in everyone. We are doing all of our due diligence, but that goes to the point that you're making. It's no longer just who are we going to draft first, who are we going to draft second. There's also, you need a much deeper pool of people that you've seen for your two-way guys, for your G League guys, for your camp guys, for your summer league guys. It's a really interesting point that you just made.
Yeah, it is, and I think case example. And although he wasn't, he played overseas for a little bit. Utah's Royce O'Neal. Here's a wing who Utah signed on a 3-year non-guaranteed contract. Who was overseas for a couple of years here, but probably went through the draft workout. So now, if you are a team at home watching the playoffs, you're saying, well, wait a minute. How did that player slip through our cracks? Did we not bring him in? And I think that's kind of where you see teams going to even teams that don't have draft picks are going to bring in guys that they're going to target, for the G League.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers. Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figured out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Requires new line. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 480p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.
What's up, Lakers fans? It's your host, Aaron Larsoul, and I need your help to keep this podcast free to download with just minimal ads. I need you to take a survey. Yeah, I know. It's short and sweet. It's completely anonymous. It's going to take you no more than 5 minutes. There's 2 ways to begin the survey. They're both easy. Go to podcastone.com/mysurvey, or just go to podcastone.com and click on the survey banner. Everything you say in the survey will help align appropriate advertisers with my audience, so you're hearing about products that you're going to care about. If you filled out a survey in the past, thank you, but I need you to do it again. You're going to do all of us at America's Lakers Podcast and Podcast One a huge favor by filling it out. Thank you for supporting my program and for taking the time to complete the survey. Now let's get back to the conversation.
Now back to America's Lakers Podcast.
So I want to shift over to free agency here, the other big part of the NBA summer. And I'm not going to ask you about any specific guys because we'd all just be
get in trouble.
Well, and we'd just be guessing at this point, right? Who knows? We would just be guessing. But what is interesting to me is kind of the mechanics of free agency. And the Lakers have made, it's no surprise. They've made it clear that they're going big game hunting this offseason. So what is that like? What is it pitching? What is it like pitching big name stars? What does the free agency meeting look like? The pitch meeting?
Well, I label the Lakers as, and it's probably fitting because of where they are in Hollywood, as having great supporting actors, and now it's time to get a couple lead actors. And that's how I look at the Lakers here. And Being involved, in 2010 when we went out and pitched LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh and those players like that, it is an interesting exercise to go out there where you are trying to sell them, and what the decision is going to impact everyone here. And I think two things should happen. Pitch what you can sell and don't promise anything. Where sell your product on the court, as far as if you are the Lakers, sell your young players. Go into a CBA 101 during the meeting. These players are well educated as far as how the salary cap works, as far as to show player X, all right, if you come on board, then this is what we have available to bring back. Or if you come on board and take a discount, we can bring maybe 2 players in here. And I think after that, then it's really for the player to decide what he wants to do here. There is certainly the appeal of life outside of basketball. What are the options if you are in Los Angeles, non-basketball? That certainly has an advantage over maybe some other places here. But as I said, free agency is the unknown. It is hard for teams to have players, leave where they're from, or for where they last played here. That's why sometimes it's a lot easier to acquire a player in a trade, but then you also have to give up things in there, where this is you're just, basically creating cap space and go out and signing a player. But, when we met in 2010 with all those guys, you're in a waiting game. Players, that timeline, players didn't decide it till July 8th. And if you're the Lakers, what you're probably going to do is you're going to have all your contingency plans in order. If you are going to be able to get a player, okay, do we need to find a third team to clear out cap space? Who is that team waiting? So if you do get that commitment, the first phone call is that to Team A. And you're not in the scramble mode here. So you've got to have all your ducks in a line. And then on the opposite, what happens if you don't get these guys? What happens if you miss out on your targets here? Do you want to go out and be reckless with your money? Do you want to go out and spend just to spend? And I've been in situations where in New Jersey we did. In 2010 we missed out on, all those guys. And we had back then, which was a lot, was $40 million in cap space. And we wound up going out and signed Travis Outlaw and Jordan Farmar and Johan Petro and Anthony Morrow and those groups who were probably rotational players, but we had to overpay. And just because, I always say, just because you have the money doesn't always have to have, you don't have to spend it. So make sure you have a good plan B.
That's Bobby Marks at Bobby Marks42 on Twitter, front office insider for ESPN. And he's going to be part of their draft coverage. He also writes a bunch of stuff and has a primer up right now on ESPN, looking at everybody's offseason, including these Lakers. You just talked about the advantage of the city of Los Angeles and all the business opportunities in Hollywood and the weather and the lifestyle, et cetera, outside of just basketball reasons. But how much of an advantage is it having Magic Johnson as the guy, as the face of the organization, as the guy who's in those meetings?
Well, I think it's huge. I think the two people that are the most important, the people, I would say, the three probably most important people here is that you have a strong ownership group there, and you do with Jeannie Buss. There's stability there, and you know that. I think that a person like Magic, I would call him the closer, where he would come in and close the deal. I mean, that's what you brought him on for, along with his, Hall of Fame, expertise. And then I think your coach has to have a role in the pitch, because he's the person who is telling that free agent, how are we going to use you? How are we going to, how are we going to use you with Brandon Ingram here? What style of play we have. So I think those three components there is important. And I think the pitch of Los Angeles it can stand alone on itself. That these players know the city, they've been through the city, they played in the city, they know the history of the Lakers and how great of an organization it was and is still. And I think that could sell itself just on its own.
One of the most exciting things for Lakers fans and for those of us that cover the team or within the team and the team itself is the flexibility that the Lakers have And there's a lot of paths that the Lakers have set themselves up for to improve the team. And one of those is to try to get 2 max slots, that free agent slots, which are basically, it's a done deal. And in an attempt to keep Julius, that would require trading Luol Deng, who was signed in the summer of love in 2016, as far as the Players Association and
One day, Aaron, we'll have a 30 for 30 here at ESPN, and we'll talk all about those contracts in the summer of 2016.
So the Lakers were able to, what has turned out to be a really good trade, were able to trade Timofey Mozgov in one deal, one guy who was signed there. But Luol Deng is still on the roster, and the numbers are the numbers, and Magic has joked about that contract. What does it take to is it even possible? I mean, is there any, I guess it's a two-part question, is there any untradeable contract in the NBA? And if not, what would it take to get off of Luol's contract? Is it 2 first-round picks? Is it a first-round pick and one of the young core? To trade him into somebody else's cap space, to just free up all of the cap space?
I think, Aaron, you're looking at 2 first-round picks. And I think last year, the Clippers, when they traded Jamal Crawford to the Hawks to clear room to try to sign Danilo Gallinari, they wound up trading that Rocket pick they had acquired from the Chris Paul trade, and Crawford was owed $15-16 million. Now you add another year to Deng, and that's a team taking back a second year here. It's not. I think if it was on an expiring contract, yes, you could probably you can get rid of a lottery protected first there. The hard part with Deng is that there's not many teams with cap space. You're looking at yourself, the Lakers, Philadelphia, possibly Chicago, Dallas, maybe Phoenix, Sacramento, Atlanta. So it's not like there's 25, 26 teams that can take his contract in. So I think that's another obstacle as far as moving him. I think on the other side is that if the Lakers do miss out on some of these key free agents, I think they have an opportunity to be a team that can be a facilitator as a third team, taking back some contracts if a team is looking to clear room, and if you can get an asset here where it doesn't ruin your flexibility in the future. I think that's also another option that you can probably look at.
So I just mentioned Julius Randle, and in my opinion, he was the Lakers' best player last year, and I know that the Lakers would love to have him back. Obviously, there are cap permutations, and he has to be willing to come back at the right number. But I know that the Lakers would love to have him back. What do you think he's going to be a restricted free agent? What do you think the restricted market is going to look like this summer?
It's interesting. I mean, it goes back to what teams have room. I think the Mavericks are certainly a wild card, based on, they're accelerating the rebuild, probably being less conservative here. That's a team that could have, $25, $26 million in possibly room. I think, Aaron, a lot of it has to do with what happens the night of the draft. Some of these bigs that go in the top 6 for teams that have cap space, does that maybe eliminate the market a little bit here? I think that's probably something to take into account. But you're right. I mean, Julius, if he was an unrestricted free agent, he would probably get $18, $20 million on the market. But he's not. The Lakers have the right to match any offer sheet, which I think certainly they would, and if they do miss out on their key guy, but. It will be interesting for him, and I think it will be important to, have him on, him and Aaron Minch's agent, on speed dial, because I think the one thing you don't want to do is miss out on your targets and then also lose, Julius. And, the good thing is that you do have 2 days to match if an offer sheet does come in.
So just a couple more and we'll get you out of here if you have the time. I want one general kind of NBA question. You are one of the most qualified people to speak on this. What do you make of kind of just general thoughts? What's your take on the Brian Colangelo Philly situation? I mean, did that situation, even though maybe not specifically his fault, did he kind of force, or did the situation force the ownership's hand in Philadelphia?
Yeah, probably one of the most bizarre situation I think any of us ever seen.
And it was a year of very strange NBA stories, and this really has to be, if not at the top of the list, towards the top of the list.
It really was, Aaron. I mean, I was out in LA for about a week ago. Ironically, I was at Harvard Westlake when the news broke, and I've said before, I was standing next to Brian Colangelo when somebody sent me the link to the article. So I was.
So you were reading it, standing there looking at him, huh?
I was right there.
Wow.
I guess I'm not an investigative journalist. So if I probably would have tried to pin him for a quote, but I wasn't, and I think it took me probably a day to digest what happened. I felt all along, although I'm not a sleuth, that it probably was not Brian, that it was probably, if it came out to be somebody connected to him, we realized that it was his wife. And if that was the truth, which eventually did, I didn't see how Brian could survive there. And I think he's a good man, and I think he's done a lot of good things in Phoenix and Toronto and Philadelphia. But I think where we are in this day and age, where there's a lot of times when I was in Brooklyn or New Jersey where I would be riding home after a game or a loss, or at the trade deadline, and I would confide in my wife information. Either about players, medical, but that never got on social media.
Right.
And this time it did. And I think the hard part is that the criticism of your own players. How do you repair that if he was back? And then some of the medical information regarding Markelle Fultz and Jahlil Okafor there that certainly got out. But and he wound up paying the price. He paid it dearly.
And the timing of it doesn't help either with, as we've been talking about the draft and free agency coming up, and it's a big summer for those guys out there. That I'm sure the timing of it didn't help. Got a couple minutes. There's some questions from the fans out there. Two in particular I want to ask. They tweeted me with the hashtag AskALP for America's Lakers Podcast, the official podcast of the Los Angeles Lakers. So I want to just run two by you. Pedro Contreras at Pedro_Giovanni says, the draft is almost here. We've been talking about the draft a lot next Thursday. He wants to know if there is a move or something that could happen for the Lakers on draft night that could be seen as a clue towards looking at what may happen in free agency.
Well, I think from free agency, I think we've got a pretty understanding what the pathway to get. I say the pathway to 70. That's the max numbers. If come draft night, all of a sudden the 25th pick and Luol Deng and the 2020 pick is traded, I think, Aaron, we have an idea where on where we're heading.
Can make an educated guess, huh?
Yeah, I think we'd have a pretty good understanding where things are heading. And I think that's probably the one thing that you would probably the unlikely scenario. But Aaron, they're going to get a good player at that pick. It is a draft rich with guards in that range, in that 15 to 35 range. You can get, 2s and 3s out there. If that's what you want to get, you could probably get a backup point guard, out there. So sometimes, your upgrade starts, your free agent upgrade, starts, 10 days before.
Right, having guys that you can pitch those free agents on. Last one, this is from Ryan Payne at TheRaiderRyan on Twitter. Ryan wants to say, he says, with such big and attractive fish looming in free agency, is it sometimes difficult for an exec to put the proper focus on the draft with both being so close together?
No, I don't. I think you do good enough. I think you operate on two different timelines. I think you operate on the timeline of the draft, which is a week away, and you've been doing that for the last couple months here, and then you operate on the timeline of free agency. And I think in between, the last, couple of weeks, I'm sure if you're in Los Angeles or New York or Brooklyn that you're having meetings not just about the draft, but also free agency. I think where it does get a little bit tricky is if the draft was on the 28th and then you've got free agency 3 days later, there is a little bit of a, the days that back up into each other. But now we've got 10 or 11 days before we get to July 1. So, no, I think teams do a good job as far as separating the two there.
I'm going to let Bobby go on that so he can get back to all of the wonderful work he's been doing and prepping for the draft on ESPN next Thursday. As I said, America's Lakers Podcast will be at the Lakers facility, so I will talk to you from then. But until then, I want to say thank you to Bobby. It was great stuff at BobbyMarks42 on Twitter. And, Bobby, appreciate your time.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks for listening to America's Lakers Podcast, exclusively on Podcast One Sportsnet. New episodes every Wednesday on PodcastOne.com, the Podcast One app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers. Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figured out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Requires new line. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 480p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.
4 shot. I'm Tim McGuire with an AP News Minute. Police in Westminster, Colorado, a Denver suburb, have a person in custody after 2 adults and 2 children were shot in an office parking lot this afternoon. Investigators say they're interviewing the driver of a car seen leaving that lot at the time of the shooting. Still no word on the conditions of the shooting victims. The Justice Department's Inspector General releases a report on FBI handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Included in the findings that former FBI Director James Comey was insubordinate and departed from normal procedure, and there was no political bias involved. Director Christopher Wray says the Bureau has learned some lessons.
We're going to learn from this report, and we're going to be better and stronger as a result.
The report also found an FBI attorney was removed from the special counsel's Russia investigation for writing anti-Trump messages. That's in addition to an FBI agent who was also taken off that investigation because of his emails to another FBI attorney. I'm Tim McGuire.